There is a certain kind of person who does something on public transport that most of us no longer know how to do. They get on a bus, sit down next to a complete stranger, look out the window for 5 seconds, and then say something perfectly ordinary. Quite a crowd today. "It's cold, isn't it?" Going far? Their voice is calm, never aggressive, as if they had known that person for years, and the person sitting next to them, in 9 cases out of 10, does the same thing. Reaches for the phone, puts on headphones, gives a quick, closed nod, the kind that does not invite a single word more. And those few seconds are everything that will ever happen between them. Most people watch this scene and think the same thing. Look at that. Some boring person with nothing better to do. Probably lonely. But psychology says that this person, the one many label as intrusive or sad, may be the only one in the entire bus doing something all of us are quietly losing. And that behind that seemingly meaningless chat about the weather lies one of the most powerful, scientifically proven remedies for the mind. A remedy people over the age of 50 cannot afford to stop taking. To understand what is really happening, we first have to look at who these people are and where their need to talk to strangers comes from. Empirical psychology divides this phenomenon into 3 groups, and all 3 have very different inner stories. The first group has done this their entire lives. They grew up in a time when you talked to the merchant at the market while he weighed your tomatoes, when the neighbor in the elevator always asked how the children were, when in a coffee house everyone knew who was who, and silence between people was the exception, not the rule. Their nervous system was never trained to stay silent in front of an unfamiliar face. For them, talking to a stranger is not extroversion. It is the native language of daily life. People who entered adulthood before the phone entered everyone's pocket often belong to this group. The second group is something entirely different. They were not always like this. There was a period in their life when they sat in the same bus, looked out the window, and stayed quiet just like everyone else. But somewhere between the ages of 45 and 60, something quietly shifted in them. The children moved out, work stopped or shrank. Old friends thinned out, some passed away, some moved to other cities to be closer to their grandchildren, some simply went silent. And one ordinary morning, this person realized something they do not always dare to say out loud. That no one had said their name in 3 days, that the last voice they had heard was the voice of a news anchor on the television, that their only conversations had been with the cashier at the store, and only, "Hello, thank you, goodbye." The nervous system cannot bear that kind of silence. Biologically, it is unprepared for it, so it began to look for contact wherever it could still find it, on the bus, in the doctor's waiting room, on a park bench, at the newsstand. Talking to a stranger for this person is not a pastime. It is a hidden survival mechanism their brain invented entirely on its own, with no one's help. The third group is perhaps the smallest but the most interesting. These are people who use the conversation with a stranger to process something inside themselves. They got laid off, so they talk to the taxi driver about the economy. They buried someone, so they want a neutral stranger to listen to a story about who that person was. They got divorced, so they speak with a fellow passenger on the train about life in general, never explicitly about their divorce. Strangers, for them, have one rare quality. They do not judge, and they do not remember. That is a psychological combination no one who knows them well can ever offer. Each of these 3 groups, though they appear similar from the outside, has a completely different inner content. And all 3 of them are doing something that science has been trying to measure since the 1980s. The sociologist Mark Granovetter at Harvard published a paper in 1973 that changed the way we look at human relationships. The title was simple, "The Strength of Weak Ties." What he discovered was the opposite of what most people would expect. Granovetter proved that our most important life outcomes, finding a job, new ideas, partners, opportunities, most often do not come from our closest relationships. They come from what he called weak ties, people we know only superficially. The neighbor on the second floor, a colleague from another department, the woman who makes our coffee every morning. And Granovetter's theory only opened the door. What followed in the next 50 years of research showed something even more serious. Dr. Gillian Sandstrom, a British psychologist, conducted a series of experiments which revealed that people who, over the course of an ordinary day, exchange brief conversations with several different strangers, not friends, not family, but strangers, report measurably better mood at the end of that day, less feeling of loneliness, a stronger sense of belonging to a community, and what surprised the science itself: higher cognitive sharpness, sharper memory, faster responses to tasks after such conversations. But perhaps the most important study on this topic was published in 2014. Professors Nicholas Epley and Juliana Schroeder at the University of Chicago took a group of people who commuted to work by train every day. They divided them into 3 groups. One group had to sit in silence as usual. The second group was instructed to behave as if they wanted to be alone. Headphones, phone, avoiding eye contact. The third group had to start a conversation with a complete stranger sitting next to them. Before the experiment, all participants predicted the same outcome. Those who were supposed to talk to a stranger told the researchers it would be the worst commute of their lives, that it would be awkward, that the other person would be annoyed, that they would feel stupid. The result was stunning. The group that was forced to talk with strangers reported significantly better mood, less stress, and a more pleasant commute than either of the other 2 groups. And more importantly, not a single stranger in the experiment reacted negatively to being approached. No one was irritated, no one was disturbed. On the contrary, the vast majority were genuinely pleased. Scientists named this phenomenon pluralistic ignorance, the situation in which all of us assume that others do not want a conversation, while in reality all of us are quietly waiting for someone else to begin it first. So what is actually happening in the brain when we talk to a stranger? First, a small dose of oxytocin is released, the hormone of trust and connection. Even though the conversation lasts only a few minutes, its chemical signature in the brain remains visible for hours afterward. Second, the prefrontal cortex activates, the part of the brain responsible for language, empathy, and complex thought. A conversation with a stranger is, for the brain, a different kind of challenge than a conversation with family. With a stranger, you cannot rely on shortcuts and ready-made phrases. You have to listen, adjust, read signals. The brain wakes up. Third, the amygdala calms down, the inner alarm for danger that, in the modern world, often runs without reason. A positive contact with a stranger sends the brain a message. The world is not a threat. I am allowed to relax. And fourth, something especially important for people after 50. The default mode network is interrupted. That is the part of the brain which, in silence, begins to chew on old thoughts, worries, regrets. A 5-minute conversation with a stranger shuts down that inner loop, which, for an older person, is often the greatest enemy. 5 minutes of small talk about the weather is not chatter. It is a quiet neuromedicine. And the dose is precisely measured, and after 50, that medicine becomes more important than ever. To understand why, we have to look at one more piece of research that very few people take seriously until it hits them personally. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, currently led by Professor Robert Waldinger, is the longest longitudinal study in the history of science. It began in 1938 and has followed the same people and their children for almost 90 years. The goal was simple: to discover what makes a human life long, healthy, and meaningful. When the researchers summed up the results after decades of analysis, they discovered something that surprised even them. The strongest predictor of longevity and mental health in later years was not money, not career, not physical activity, not genes. It was the quality of social connections. And here is one detail that often gets overlooked. When the researchers looked deeper into the data, they discovered that it was not only the number of close relationships that mattered. The diversity of social contacts mattered just as much. People who regularly had brief, surface conversations with different kinds of people, neighbors, shopkeepers, fellow passengers, showed a significantly lower risk of cognitive decline. Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad at Brigham Young University took it even further. In a meta-analysis covering more than 3 million people across the world, she found that social isolation increases the risk of premature death by the same percentage as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Not 10, not 12, 15. A brain that stops communicating regularly with other people does not only become sadder, it becomes physically less healthy. Its synapses weaken faster. Its immune system deteriorates. Its ability to adapt to new situations declines. And now let us return to that person on the bus, the one who sat next to you and said, "Quite a crowd today." Maybe they had nothing else to do. Maybe they were not boring at all. Maybe their brain, without even understanding why, was trying to defend itself against something the statistics know very well, to delay the silence which in the later years can become more dangerous than almost any physical illness. And here we come to an important question. If talking to a stranger is so good for us, why do most of us instinctively reject it? There are several layers to the answer. The first layer is cultural change. The generations now in middle age grew up in a world where strangers had certain unspoken rules. It was not unusual to ask a stranger for an address, the time, advice, the market, the bus, the coffee house. These were natural spaces of conversation. The generations born after the 1990s grew up differently. Their childhood was marked by the warning, never talk to strangers. That warning, however well-intentioned, shaped the entire psychological structure of adults who are now in their 30s and 40s. For them, conversation with the unfamiliar is instinctively associated with danger, even when they consciously know it is not. The second layer is the phone. The phone is no longer just a device. The phone has become, for the modern nervous system, a psychological armor. The point of focus we look down at when we want to tell the world, "Please do not address me." Headphones in the ears serve the same function. They are the modern version of an ancient gesture. Covering the face, they say, "I am unavailable. This space does not concern me." The third layer is the fear of awkwardness. Our brain is evolutionarily programmed to avoid social rejection, because in ancient times, rejection from the group meant death. That instinct is still active. It still tells us not to risk a conversation that might end strangely, even though, in reality, as Epley and Schroeder showed us, that risk barely exists. And the fourth layer, the saddest one, is habit. Many people have, over time, stopped speaking to strangers so completely that they have forgotten how it goes. A brain which has not used a certain behavior for years loses its skill at it. The sentence, "Quite a crowd today," feels impossibly difficult to someone who has not said it in 20 years, even though biologically it is the simplest thing their speech apparatus can do. Of course, there is another side to this story, and it would be dishonest not to mention it. There are people on public transport you do not want a conversation with. The drunk ones, the aggressive ones, the ones who do not understand boundaries and who will interpret your single polite nod as an invitation to tell you about their family for the next 40 minutes. Distinguishing such a person from someone who simply wants a calm, brief exchange is a skill, and it is learned over time. There are also days when you simply do not have it in you. After 12 hours of work, after a difficult conversation, after news that hits you hard, headphones in your ears are not rudeness. They are a defense your nervous system genuinely needs. And there is one more truth worth saying out loud. Sometimes that person on the bus really is deeply lonely. Sometimes the bus driver is the only human who says good morning to her that day. Sometimes her monologue about the weather turns into a 5-minute story about her late husband, because yours is the first pair of ears she has had in a week. That is heavy. You are not obliged to carry that weight. I understand, but it is important to know what is actually happening, because the next time someone sits down next to you and starts a conversation about nothing, perhaps they are not seeking your attention out of boredom. Perhaps they are seeking something no one else will give them that day, proof that they exist. You do not always have to give it, but when you can, when you are not in a hurry, when the bus is moving slowly through the city, try it. 5 minutes. Nothing more. In Japan, there is an old phrase, ichigo ichi. It translates literally as, one time, one meeting. In its essence lies a belief carried through centuries in the tea ceremony, that every encounter between two people is unique, unrepeatable, that it will never happen in exactly the same form again, and precisely because of this, it deserves full attention. This idea may sound poetic, but it has its own hard scientific foundation. The brain does not always distinguish between a deep connection and a brief one. It simply remembers. Today someone smiled at my words. Today someone did not look at their phone while I was speaking. Today, even if only for 5 minutes, I was not invisible. What protects older people from cognitive decline is often not great love, nor a large family. It is, more often, exactly these brief, seemingly meaningless encounters. The woman at the bakery who knows their name, the bus driver they nod to every morning, a neighbor on a park bench they have spoken with about the weather for 15 years without ever sitting down for coffee at his place. These small nodes, taken together, form the network that keeps the mind awake when the larger relationships of life naturally begin to thin. And here, perhaps, is the most important lesson this topic can offer. That growing older does not have to mean losing all of one's connections. It often means only changing the kind of connection. Fewer great conversations, more small ones. Fewer deep loves, more surface warmth. And that this is not a loss, it is simply a different form of richness, one the modern world has not yet learned to value. Tomorrow morning, when you step onto the bus, look around you. You will see two kinds of people, the ones with headphones, and the rare person who looks out the window and may, given the chance, say something perfectly ordinary. These two groups are not opposites. They are the same person at different stages of life. The one wearing headphones may, one day, become the one who starts the conversation first. And the one who starts conversations was once, long ago, the one putting on headphones. The only difference is this: which group understood in time what silence really is, and what it is not. Silence is precious, but it is not everything. The human brain, and especially the brain after 50, does not feed on silence alone. It also feeds on those small, almost insignificant moments in which someone else recognizes that we exist. 5 minutes of conversation with a stranger can stay in your memory longer than anything you saw on your phone screen that day. So now, honestly, are you the kind of person who starts the conversation first on public transport, or the one who puts on the headphones? And why do you think that is? Maybe there is a memory, a moment, a person from public transport you still remember. Write it in the comments. I will read every single one. And if this video gave you a thought you had not had before, share it with someone you know who spends a lot of time alone. Perhaps this is exactly what they needed to hear today. Thank you for being with me until this moment. See you in the next video.